I want you to picture something for a second. It starts with just complete silence, and then a phone rings.
Yeah, just that repetitive ringing.
Right. It rings once, twice, three times. Then you get that robotic voicemail tone. So you try again, but, nothing.
It's a deeply unsettling feeling.
It really is. You're sitting in your living room. It's maybe 10 at night. You're trying to reach your daughter, who, without fail, always calls at 9 just to say she made it back to her apartment.
Or, maybe it's a husband who left for work in the morning, kissed you goodbye, and he never showed up at the office.
Exactly. Or a college student who texted on my way home at midnight, and you're just staring at that glowing green bubble on your screen, and you're slowly realizing that text is like the absolute last proof of life you have.
Which is terrifying because it's a total rupture of normal life. I mean, one minute you're worrying about what to make for dinner, and the next you've just stepped off a cliff into the unknown.
Right. And in the U.S. alone, someone is reported missing every 2 minutes.
Every 2 minutes. That's a staggering statistic.
It is. Every 2 minutes, someone's phone is ringing out to voicemail, just like that. Now, to be fair to the numbers, the vast majority of those people are found within, say, 72 hours.
Yeah, they usually had a medical emergency or maybe a mental health crisis, or they just lost their phone.
Right, they crashed on a friend's couch or something. For most, the panic does subside. But today, our mission for this deep dive is to look at what happens when the call never comes.
When you hit day 4, then week 4, then, year 4.
Exactly. What happens when the system fails and a missing persons case becomes a cold case? We're going to unpack the darkest secret of this whole system, which is that a huge number of these unresolved cases are actually murders staged as disappearances.
And we're going to look at the 3 specific types of these crossover cases, right? Where a missing case suddenly becomes a homicide case.
Yes, and we'll see how civilian technology is finally bringing answers to families who have been waiting decades. But first, let's talk about the initial disappearance. If I vanish tonight, I think we all have this built-in assumption about how the world reacts.
Oh, absolutely. We watch a lot of movies.
Right. We assume there's going to be a massive manhunt tomorrow morning, like helicopters in the air, search dogs sniffing our shoes, detectives just aggressively interrogating everyone.
But the reality of American law enforcement is it's terrifyingly different.
How so? Like, what actually happens?
Well, it really depends on your age and your legal status. If a child under 18 disappears, the system actually does look a bit like the movies. The response is pretty instantaneous.
Because of Amber Alerts and things like that, right?
Exactly. You trigger Amber Alerts, which blast the description to millions of cell phones. Multi-agency task forces spin up immediately. The FBI often gets involved. There's no waiting period because a missing child is implicitly treated as a victim in extreme danger.
But for an adult, the brakes just get slammed on.
Hard. I mean, for an adult, in most jurisdictions across the U.S., law enforcement is not legally required to immediately investigate your disappearance as a crime.
Wait, hold on. So if I vanish and my spouse calls the police and says, this is entirely out of character, something is terribly wrong, they'll just jump into action.
No, they really don't. And it's because of a fundamental legal principle, the right to vanish.
The right to vanish.
Yeah. As an adult citizen, you are not legally obligated to stay in your current life. You have the constitutional right to empty your bank account, leave your job, walk out on your marriage, and just never speak to a single soul from your past ever again.
Wow. And you don't have to tell the police you're doing that.
Nope. So the police are operating under the assumption that you just decided you were sick of it all and went to start a new life in Florida.
That seems like a massive loophole. I mean, it's like giving a bank robber a 3-day head start before you even bother checking to see if the vault is locked.
That is precisely what it is. And predators or, abusive partners, they know this loophole exists.
Yeah.
And they explicitly exploit it.
Because the first 48 hours of a homicide investigation are the most critical, right?
Exactly. That's when forensic evidence is fresh. But if a killer murders an adult and stages it to look like they simply walked away, maybe they send a text from the victim's phone saying, I need some space for a few days, they instantly buy themselves time.
Because the police are out looking for someone who wanted space, not a murderer.
Right. And by the time the police finally realize, okay, they haven't touched their bank account in 3 weeks, they missed their child's birthday, this isn't voluntary, what's happened to the forensics?
It's gone.
Completely gone. The physical crime scene has been sanitized with bleach, or the elements have washed it away. Biological evidence like DNA has degraded. Witnesses forget things. Digital footprints like neighborhood ring cameras, they usually overwrite themselves every 7 to 14 days anyway.
So the trail isn't just cold, it's been actively erased by time.
Yes. And there's a really bleak reality to how this delay is applied too, because it isn't applied equally across the board. The system has these massive blind spots based on who the missing person is.
Right, which just feeds the cold case pipeline even faster for certain communities. Well, let's talk about the demographic disparities.
They're staggering. Black Americans make up about 34% of all missing persons cases in the U.S.
But they get a tiny fraction of the national media coverage. And when a case doesn't get media traction, it doesn't get public pressure.
Exactly. And without public pressure, police departments, which are already underfunded, simply don't allocate the same investigative urgency. The response times just drag.
And if you compound that with the jurisdictional nightmares we see in indigenous communities, the system essentially just breaks down entirely.
Oh, the data on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is horrifying. In certain regions, they face murder rates more than 10 times the national average.
10 times? That's unbelievable.
But when an Indigenous woman goes missing on or near a reservation, the investigation is almost immediately paralyzed by bureaucratic red tape.
How does that happen? Walk me through those crucial first 48 hours there.
It comes down to a tangled web of legal authority. You have tribal police, who often know the community best, but they have severely limited resources and jurisdictional power, especially if a non-Indigenous suspect is involved.
Right, they can't always make an arrest.
Exactly. Then you have county or state law enforcement, who might have the resources but lack the authority on tribal land. And then the FBI, who were required to step in for major felonies on reservations, often face massive delays in deployment.
So instead of a unified task force hitting the ground running, they're just arguing over who's in charge.
Pretty much. You have days or even weeks of these agencies trying to figure out who actually holds the file, while the perpetrator is driving away and the evidence is washing away in the rain.
That's devastating. So the foundational rule is basically the less visibility and priority a victim has in life, the colder their case becomes in death.
Brutally simple, but true. When the system fails to act quickly, the window for a standard investigation just completely closes.
Okay, so what happens then? When that window shuts, the file goes into the cabinet. But it doesn't just stay a missing person forever, right?
No, eventually something shifts, it crosses over. When investigators analyze long-term cold cases, they generally categorize the solved ones into 3 specific types of crossover cases.
This is when the system officially recognizes they weren't missing, they were murdered. Let's break these down, because understanding these 3 types completely changes how you look at a disappearance. What's type 1?
Type 1 is the staged disappearance. This is the most psychologically complex and deliberately criminal type.
Because they're actively manipulating the police, right?
Yes. The perpetrator constructs a narrative specifically to trigger that right to vanish delay we just talked about.
And statically, who is usually doing this staging?
Almost always an intimate partner or someone extremely close to the victim. The FBI has noted for decades that domestic violence is a massive hidden factor here.
The chilling part is that the person crying in the police station handing over a photo is usually the primary suspect.
Absolutely. They manage the flow of information. They say, oh, she packed a bag and went to a friend's, or he was stressed and drove off. And forensically, this staging is devastating.
While the police wait for the victim to cool off, the killer is tearing up the carpet and bleaching the walls.
Exactly. Because in a murder trial, the golden rule is no body, no crime. The legal term is corpus delicti, the body of the crime.
Right. Without a physical body, you can't prove someone was shot or strangled. You just have an absence.
And proving beyond a reasonable doubt that an absence is a murder is one of the hardest things a prosecutor can do.
Okay, so that's type 1, the active manipulation. What about type 2?
Type 2 is the long-term cold case missing. This is a genuine investigation that simply hits a brick wall and runs out of leads.
So no one is necessarily feeding the police a brilliant lie here.
Not usually. The circumstances are highly suspicious, like someone disappeared walking home from a bar, or their car was found abandoned on the highway with the keys in the ignition.
Which doesn't sound voluntary at all.
It doesn't, and police usually suspect foul play immediately, but they just can't prove it. Forensically, it's a total void.
Because modern science needs something physical to test, right? Like blood spatter or a weapon.
Exactly. We need touch DNA or a cell phone tower ping. In a type 2 case, the person just seemingly evaporates.
So how does a type 2 ever get solved? How does it cross over?
It almost always requires an external, unpredictable catalyst. like a hunter tracking a deer stumbles across a partial skull decades later.
Or a deathbed confession.
Yeah, or someone gets arrested for an unrelated burglary, their DNA goes into the system, and it pings against a tiny speck of material found in an abandoned car back in 1995. It essentially requires luck.
Wow. Which brings us to type 3. And honestly, this one feels the most haunting because it's happening so frequently right now. The underwater discovery.
It is a massive phenomenon. A person disappears, typically driving a vehicle. They vanish near a river, a lake, or a quarry.
The local police do their standard searches. They might even send divers in, and they find absolutely nothing, so the case goes cold.
Right. And then, 20 or 30 years later, an independent dive team locates a sunken vehicle entirely by accident, and there are human remains still sitting in the driver's seat.
A missing persons case instantly becomes a cold case recovery. Why are type 3 cases so prevalent?
You have to understand the environment itself. Water is the ultimate forensic eraser. It acts as an almost impenetrable barrier to traditional police work.
I mean, obviously it's hard to see through, but police have boats and divers. Why does it erase so much?
Well, think about how search teams operate on land. They look for disturbed earth, tire tracks, or use dogs for the scent of decay. Water neutralizes all of that instantly.
Well, because the current just smooths out the mud.
Exactly. The tracks are gone in hours, the water temperature suppresses the scent of decomposition, and if the water is even mildly murky, visibility drops to zero just a few feet down.
So a police boat could be floating 10 feet directly above an SUV and have no idea.
None whatsoever. The water swallows the crime scene whole.
I want to make this concrete for you listening, because there's a case that perfectly illustrates this. It shows what happens when police do everything right, but the scene is just hidden. Let's talk about Robert Long.
Robert Long's case is a masterclass in the limitations of standard missing persons protocols.
Right. So it's 2010, December 21st, just before Christmas. We're in Miller's Place, a town on Long Island. Robert Long is 62, totally entrenched in his community.
Just a normal guy living his life.
Exactly. It's a Tuesday evening. He runs the most mundane errand. He drives to the local liquor store. He makes a purchase, walks out to his car, gets in, drives away, and vanishes from the face of the earth.
Now, the initial response from Suffolk County Police is actually quite thorough. They treat it as an adult missing person, but they hit all the procedural checkpoints quickly.
Right. They canvass the area, knock on doors, call the hospitals for John Does. They pull his financial records and subpoena his cell phone provider.
And they hit a brick wall. Zero activity after 8 p.m. that Tuesday. His accounts freeze, his phone goes dark. But because they don't have a body, or a vehicle, or a sign of a struggle, the forensic trail just stops dead.
There is nothing to analyze, so the police are helpless, and his family is left in this agonizing void.
Psychologists call it ambiguous loss, or a liminal space. You're trapped between grief and hope.
Because you can't truly mourn without proof, but you can't move forward either. Every time a car pulls up, you think it's him. Robert Long's family lived in that suspension for 15 years.
15 years. It's heartbreaking.
But then, October 2025, the story shifts dramatically because an independent underwater recovery team brings civilian side-scan sonar to Long Island. Let's break down how this tech works.
Side-scan sonar is the skeleton key unlocking these Type 3 cases. It's vastly different from just dropping a waterproof GoPro in the river.
I always picture like a submarine radar with that green sweeping line. Is that close?
Sort of, but it's acoustic imaging and much more precise. The team uses a towfish, which looks like a small torpedo. They drag it behind a slow-moving boat at a specific depth.
And it emits acoustic pulses sideways, right? Hence, side scan.
Precisely. The sound waves travel through the water until they hit an object. When it hits a rock or a vehicle, the signal bounces back. The computer translates those echoes into a highly detailed image. It basically paints a picture of the lake bottom using sound.
So it completely bypasses murky water. It just cuts right through the dark.
Exactly. A riverbed is chaotic, full of curves and rocks. So when the sonar sweeps over a perfectly rectangular object with hard metallic lines, it casts a distinct acoustic shadow. It stands out immediately.
So this team is running their towfish off Miller's Place, and they find an anomaly just 15 feet below the surface.
15 feet.
Only a half-mile off his direct route. The dive team goes down, and there it is, his vehicle.
Yes.
After 15 years underwater, what does a car even look like?
It barely looks like a car. It's basically an artificial reef. The frame is intact, but the exterior is totally encrusted with biological growth barnacles, algae, sediment.
But they clear the license plate and it matches. And inside, preserved in the muck, are human remains. DNA quickly confirms it's Robert Long. The 15-year wait is over.
But from a law enforcement perspective, the work is just beginning. Finding him initiates a massive forensic pivot. It's now an active, complex death investigation.
Because finding the car answers where he was, but not how he got there.
Right. For 15 years, they had no crime scene. Now they have a really complicated one. Investigators have to analyze the vehicle's structural damage. Did he hit the water at high speed in an accident?
Or is the body pristine, meaning someone pushed it off a boat ramp?
Exactly. They check the gear shift. Is it in drive or park? Are the keys in the ignition? Then the medical examiner has to examine skeletal remains subjected to 15 years of water degradation.
Looking for like a bullet nick or a blunt force fracture that wasn't from the crash. They have to figure out if it was a medical emergency or a type 1 staging.
Yes, was he murdered, stuffed in his own car, and rolled into the ocean? That's what they have to answer.
The fact that 15 feet of water hit a car for 15 years is staggering. But what happens when you stretch that timeline even further, like 40 years?
This brings us to the Connecticut case, which is devastating emotionally, but also fascinating scientifically. We're moving to 1982.
1982, the height of the Reagan era. 2 missing persons cases are reported in the same area, both near water. The police search, drag the rivers, and find nothing. Decades pass. How on earth did the police miss a massive metal box for over 4 decades?
Because of the immense technological gap between 1982 and 2025. In 1982, the sonar available to a local sheriff was incredibly primitive.
What was it? Just basic depth finders?
Essentially, yes, single-beam sonar. Instead of a wide fan of pulses sideways, it just shoots one narrow pulse straight down. It's just to tell you if the water is 10 or 20 feet deep.
So if you drove over a car with that, wouldn't it show a bump in the depth?
It might, but you have to factor in the environment.
Yeah.
A car doesn't sit on top of the mud like a toy. The heavy engine sinks, and then sedimentation happens. Every time it rains, mud and debris wash over it.
Oh, wow. So it gets buried.
Completely buried. A 1982 sonar bouncing off a buried car would just read as a slight, muddy bump, totally indistinguishable from a rock. The car was literally invisible to that technology.
Swallowed by time. Fast forward to November 2025, a citizen detective YouTube group called Exploring with a Mission brings modern side-scan sonar to those same waterways.
Because modern side scan looks for density and shadows. It can differentiate between soft mud and a hard metal roof buried beneath it.
And they find a vehicle, the divers go down, it's heavily deteriorated after 43 years of rust, but they get the make and model, and it matches one of the 1982 reports. And inside, they find the remains of an adult and a baby.
An adult and a child. Entombed together for 43 years in complete darkness.
I can't even fathom what that family went through. But from an investigative standpoint, this is an exponentially harder forensic pivot, right?
Oh, absolutely. After 43 years, traditional ID methods are useless. Fingerprints are gone. Dental records from 1982 might have burned in a fire or been thrown away when a dentist retired. The police files might be incomplete.
So how do you scientifically prove who they are?
You have to bypass traditional methods and use forensic genetic genealogy, the exact same tech used to catch the Golden State Killer.
How do you get a genetic profile from bones that have been underwater that long?
It's incredibly delicate. Water shatters DNA strands. Anthropologists have to extract samples from the most dense bones, often the Peters bone in the skull, which offers the most protection.
And they sequence it.
Yes, looking at hundreds of thousands of genetic markers called SNPs.
Yeah.
But they don't put it in a police database like CODIS.
Because that only works for convicted criminals.
Right. They upload it to public genealogy databases, the ones people use to find their ancestry. The system looks for people who share DNA segments with the remains.
Distant cousins and stuff. And then a genealogist acts like a historian, building a family tree backward using census records and obituaries.
Exactly. Until they find a family line that had an adult and a baby go missing in 1982. Meanwhile, detectives are cross-referencing the rusted VIN number on the engine block.
It's a beautiful application of science. It resurrects entirely dead trails using tools that sounded like sci-fi when these people vanished.
It is remarkable. But while those Type 3 cases are environmental mysteries, we also need to talk about the anomalies.
The cases that just defy logic, where the physical evidence deliberately contradicts the police narrative.
Right. These anomalies usually happen when a Type 1 staging is attempted, but the perpetrator makes a critical error. The staging is imperfect.
Let's dive into Case A, the woman with no shoes. A married woman in her mid-30s vanishes on a Tuesday morning, doesn't show up for work, Husband calls the police. Within a day, her car is found parked at a rugged hiking trailhead miles from home.
So the perpetrator has successfully constructed a narrative right away.
Yes. Wallet under the seat, phone nowhere to be found. The story seems obvious. She skipped work, went for a hike, and either got lost, fell, or was intercepted by a predator.
And the police divert massive resources searching hundreds of acres of dense forest, looking in the completely wrong place.
But a shark detective decides to sweep the couple's house again. He looks in her closet, and sitting right there, perfectly clean and neatly arranged, are her hiking boots.
That one detail shatters the entire constructed narrative.
She drove to a rugged wilderness trail and left her boots at home.
It's a massive behavioral red flag. It dictates that someone else drove her car to the trailhead as a decoy, but in their panic, they forgot a mundane detail. They forgot to take her shoes.
So they interview the husband, and his reaction is chilling. He deflects. He starts changing tiny details in his timeline. He passes one polygraph, but refuses a second one and lawyers up.
The detective knows in his gut that the husband murdered his wife, hid the body somewhere else, and drove the car to the trail.
But knowing it and proving it are two different things.
Exactly. Without the victim's body, the physical crime scene doesn't exist. No blood, no weapon.
The defense would just say, maybe she wore sneakers that day. You can't prove she's dead.
Precisely. The forensics threshold isn't met, so he remains free, and it stays a missing persons file.
Maddening. Okay, let's look at case B. The wrong direction bicycle. It's a hybrid type 1 and type 3. A 19-year-old leaves an off-campus college party at 2 a.m., intoxicated. Witnesses say he grabbed his bike and walked toward a nearby river.
The narrative is clear. Intoxicated student, dark night, dangerous river.
The police search downstream, find nothing, and rule it an accidental drowning, assuming the current swept him out to sea. 7 years later, a sonar team scans that river and gets a hit 12 feet deep. They pull out his bicycle.
But the location of the bike completely destroys the accidental drowning narrative.
It was found half a mile upstream, in the exact opposite direction of where the witnesses said he was walking.
If we look at fundamental fluid dynamics, the lie is obvious. If a person falls in a river, they drift downstream. A heavy metal bicycle cannot travel half a mile upstream fighting the current on its own.
Scientifically impossible. So what's the forensic implication?
Immediate human intervention post-disappearance. Someone physically carried or drove that bike half a mile upstream and threw it in to get rid of it.
The accidental drowning theory collapses. It's immediately reclassified as a homicide. And it means the witnesses at the party were likely lying, providing a coordinated false narrative to cover up something that happened at the house.
The physics proves the staging. It's incredible.
Wow. All right, case C, the vanishing couple. A type 2 cold case that turns into a geographic puzzle. A retired couple in their 50s disappears from their rural Southwest home.
And the scene is eerie because it's perfectly normal, but abandoned.
Both cars in the driveway, phones on the chargers, her purse, his wallet, and their beloved dogs are locked inside, alive but hungry. No sign of a struggle. They just evaporated.
A total void for 3 years.
Until a hiker exploring a remote, jagged desert area 40 miles away finds scattered skeletal remains. DNA confirms it's the wife, and the anthropologist determines she was brutally murdered. But the husband is still missing.
Which leaves investigators with a complex dual possibility puzzle. Theory 1. The husband is a second victim buried nearby. They were both abducted and executed.
And theory 2.
Theory 2. The husband is the perpetrator. He killed her, hid her body, and used the vanishing couple narrative to look like a victim before fleeing the country.
And the geography points toward an answer.
Yes. The remains were 40 miles away in harsh desert off main roads. A random drifter wouldn't risk driving out there just to dump a body. The location suggests someone who knew exactly where to go, intimate local knowledge, potentially the husband himself.
These anomalies show how fragile investigations are when evidence is manipulated. But what happens when investigating one missing person leads you directly into the nightmare of another? The ripple effect.
This is where the boundaries of isolated cases break down. It's deeply unsettling.
Let's look at the Todd Hansen case from January 2026. Todd disappears near a river, and on that exact night, witnesses heard horrific panic screams from the water.
The police search the banks, drag the river, and find nothing. It goes cold. A suspicious void.
Months later, a body finally washes up downriver. The police pull it out, assuming it's Todd. But the medical examiner does the ID, and it's not Todd Hansen, it's someone else entirely. Another missing person.
This creates an absolute forensic headache. When you pull a different body from the exact same stretch of water where someone went missing to the sound of screams, you have to analyze it through three lenses.
Walk me through those.
Possibility one is coincidence. Rivers are dangerous. It's mathematically possible for two unrelated fatal accidents to happen in the same spot within months.
Lightning strikes twice? What's possibility two?
Common circumstance. Maybe that spot is a hub for high-risk behavior like late-night drug deals. Both victims went there independently and fell victim to the inherent danger of the location.
And possibility three?
Common perpetrator. One location, two victims. You aren't dealing with accidents, you're dealing with a serial offender using that fast current as a reliable disposal site. Finding that second body completely shatters the reality of the Hansen case. Those screams are suddenly part of a violent, active pattern.
And this ripple effect can cross international borders, like the Devil-like case.
A prime example of how solving one case exposes massive systemic vulnerabilities.
In a southern U.S. state, investigators crack a decades-old homicide with a bizarrely ritualistic, theatrical crime scene, clearly an organized predator. Using genetic genealogy, they identify the killer, get his DNA, and run it through the national database. And it links to a missing persons case in another country.
And here is the systemic failure. In that other country, the victim was classified as a voluntary missing person.
Back to the right to vanish.
Precisely. Highly mobile offenders exploit jurisdictional borders. A Texas detective isn't going to call Canada about a 30-year-old file of a woman who supposedly walked out on her husband.
So the killer knew nobody was looking for him. How do we fight that if the files are locked in different cabinets in different countries?
Digital integration. Specifically, databases like VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program by the FBI.
How does VICAP work? Is it just a giant spreadsheet?
It's an algorithmic behavioral database. Detectives input highly specific, granular details, the type of not used, the ritualistic staging, the victim's demographic. The algorithms scan for behavioral signatures.
So it bridges the gap across borders.
Yes. It connected the behavioral signature in the South to the DNA evidence in the other country, proving the voluntary missing person was actually an earlier victim of the same serial predator.
Algorithmic technology catching up to systemic flaws. Which brings us to the final segment, citizen detectives. Because traditional law enforcement isn't solving a lot of these underwater cases, citizens are.
The landscape is being fundamentally altered by highly trained civilian groups armed with professional-grade technology.
The biggest is Adventures with Purpose, or AWP. Started by Jared Lysick, who was just diving to clean up river trash for YouTube and accidentally found a submerged vehicle with a missing person. He bought a massive side-scan sonar rig and started hunting full-time using a strict 5-step method.
That methodical approach separates them from reckless vigilantes.
Right. Step 1 is research. They scour databases for people who vanished near water in vehicles before modern sonar existed. Step 2, contact. They offer services to families for free. Step 3, permission. They coordinate with local law enforcement. Step 4, deploy. They run meticulous grid searches over miles of water. And step 5 is document.
That fifth step is the most critical element.
Because my immediate thought is, isn't this legally dangerous? YouTubers in wetsuits diving into a murder scene, couldn't they destroy biological evidence or break the chain of custody?
Law enforcement was terrified of exactly that. But AWP operates under a hard rule. Look, but do not touch.
So they don't open the doors?
Never. They don't reach inside. They use HD cameras to document the exterior, brush away enough algae to confirm the license plate, and surface immediately.
And then hand it to the police.
Exactly. They hand over the GPS coordinates and video and let the official forensic dive teams handle the extraction. They locate the needle, they don't analyze it.
And they're pulling cars out of rivers that sheriffs have driven past for 30 years. Modern side-scan sonar is the ultimate equalizer. But there are also systemic safety nets, like NamUs.
NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, administered by the DOJ.
Why is it so revolutionary?
Because before NamUs, the system was fragmented. An Ohio medical examiner might have an unidentified body, and a Florida family has a missing son who matches the description. But those two isolated offices had no way to talk to each other. NamUs centralizes everything, automatically cross-referencing tattoos, dental records, and DNA profiles.
Speaking of DNA, the DNA Doe project takes us to another level. Volunteer genetic genealogists sitting at home identifying John and Jane Does using terribly degraded DNA.
They step in when law enforcement runs out of budget or institutional momentum.
Like the Minneapolis railcar John Doe. Found in 2003, unidentified for over 20 years. The DNA Doe project took a tiny degraded sample, uploaded it to public genealogy sites, and built his family tree backwards.
Navigating complex privacy laws and genetic markers, triangulating data from third and fourth cousins.
They traced his heritage to a tiny town in southern Poland, found his living relatives, and gave him his name back.
It's a profound application of science. They aren't just figuring out how someone died, they're reestablishing who they were.
Wow. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to reflect on what this really means for you listening. We've talked about sonar, DNA, and police procedure, but when you strip all that away, you're left with the human element. When a genealogist matches a John Doe or a dive team pulls a car from the mud, the word families use most isn't justice, it's closure.
That distinction is so important. Justice implies a courtroom and a conviction. But in a 43-year-old case, the perpetrator might be dead. The chance for legal justice evaporated decades ago.
Right. Closure doesn't mean they forget or the pain stops. It means the agonizing suspension ends. They exit that liminal space. Robert Long's family waited 15 Christmases. The Connecticut family waited 43 years. Finding a truth allows them to transition from waiting to mourning.
And while it brings peace to those families, it raises a chilling, provocative thought for the rest of us.
What's that?
Think about the math. If civilian sonar teams and volunteer genealogists are clearing decades-old cases by the dozen right now, how many thousands of active voluntary missing adult files sitting in police cabinets today are actually brilliantly executed, solved murders?
Whoa.
Just sitting there, ignored by the system, waiting for the right person to look with the right technology. How many of history's perfect crimes are actually just mundane cases of terrible initial police protocols?
That completely shifts the paradigm. It changes how you think about every faded missing poster you see. It reminds you of that phone call from the very beginning, ringing and ringing out into the void. Because what we've learned today is that cold cases are not closed cases. They're simply delayed answers, buried under mud, time, or bad procedure. And with the technology we have now, hopefully, fewer families will have to wait decades for their phone to finally be answered. That's all for this deep dive.